Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the Asian Pacific Community Fund, thank you so much for joining us for our webinar on the California Relief Grant for nonprofits. I'm so glad that you're able to join us on time, if not early. We'll get started in just a few minutes to let folks start coming in. Please feel free to rename yourself with your first name, last name, and organization. So for me, I put Christine Najang Lee, APCF, so we know who's in the Zoom room. And also feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself and to share any comments. Happy Chuseok and Mid-Autumn Festival for those of you that celebrate. And we'll get started in just a few minutes. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. We'll give a little bit more time for folks to start trickling in. We know it's after lunchtime. Please feel free to rename yourself with your name and organization so we know who's in the Zoom. And you can also introduce yourselves in the chat as well. Thank you so much again for joining us, and we'll get started shortly. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christine Lee, and I'm with the Asian Pacific Community Fund. Thank you so much for joining us for our latest webinar on the California Relief Grant for nonprofits. I'm so glad that we have so many nonprofits joining us today, not just in Los Angeles and Orange County, but throughout Southern California, and even some nonprofits that are serving our Asian and Pacific Islander communities in Northern California and Central California. Again, this is a statewide program, so I know that we have a lot of interested organizations that are attending this webinar, not just for themselves, but also for the small businesses that they serve. Please feel free again to rename yourself with your full name and organization so we know who's in the Zoom, and also introduce yourselves in the chat, and we'll get started now. Just a really fun thing. I know we have a lot of folks in the Zoom who do celebrate these holidays. So happy Chuseok for my Korean American community, and happy Mid-Autumn Festival for those of you that are celebrating. Please make sure to check out the moon tonight. It'll be a nice big harvest moon, full and bright. So for our RSVP, we do have a lot of interest in this particular topic where we have over 50 people, staff and board members joining us from 44 different nonprofits. Of course, the majority of you are interested in this webinar in your own nonprofit's application, but we do have a few of you that are interested not just for yourselves, but also for the small business clients that you serve. And in terms of the status of your grant relief, your California Relief Grant application, a little more than half of you are on the fence about it. You're considering or are unsure. And the other 26% are considering to apply. And we know the deadline is coming up on September 30th. And it seems like in speaking with Sue and the other partners at Cal Nonprofits, that this probably will be the last chance to apply for this particular grant application with the state, which opened up just less than a year ago. So we're so happy that you can join us for this opportunity before it closes up. So in terms of the agenda, I do want to let folks know that this is a Zoom meeting, which means that it is optional for you to turn on your video, but we will keep you muted during the presentation portion of this webinar. But we do, again, welcome you to turn on your video so that way we can see your friendly faces. My name is Christine Lee. I'm the program manager here at the Asian Pacific Community Fund. In addition to being a grant maker, we also have spearheaded this, what we call the API Nonprofit Capacity Building Program, because our philosophy is that our communities are best supported by organizations that speak their language and know their cultures. And so we want to ensure that the sector of nonprofits that serve our communities are really not just well-funded, but also well-supported. So we wanted to be able to make sure that we can bring these types of timely topics through webinars, as well as other resource development types of events like Meet the Funders, to ensure that our organizations and our communities that serve are really well-supported through these kinds of programs that are out there. So without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker, Sue Sigler, who is from Cal Nonprofits. Now, Sue is the Cal Small Business Grant Project Manager, also known as CSBG. She is a former board member of Cal Nonprofits, and currently she is a consultant for nonprofits with over 30 years of experience in different areas such as organizational growth, strategic planning, program development, and fundraising. She has a bachelor's degree in social work from Cornell University, as well as an MSW from Fordham University, and currently resides in Oakland. So please join me in welcoming Sue Sigler.
Thank you so much, Christine, and hello to everyone who's with us today. It's a pleasure to be here with you talking about the California Relief Grant Program. And by way of introduction, Christine mentioned that I am currently working with Cal Nonprofits, who is an application partner for the Relief Grant Program. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in a bit. Next slide, please. But first, I wanted to introduce Cal Nonprofits. We are a membership organization statewide in California with over 10,000 nonprofits. As a policy alliance, we engage in advocacy for issues that related to nonprofits. We also help nonprofits work with government. And a good example of this work is us being here today. Originally, this program was created by the California State Legislature for small businesses. Cal Nonprofits advocacy made it possible for nonprofits to qualify for this grant program as well. And to date, over 7,500 nonprofits have gotten grants totaling almost $100 million as a result. Next slide, please. I'm going to be talking primarily today about nonprofits, but I do want to make sure that everybody gets the information for small businesses too. This program is open to both nonprofits and small businesses. And to get more information, you can look at us at calnonprofits.org, and I'm going to show you more about that in a moment. And small businesses would want to go to careliefgrant.com. And we're going to put that contact information up again a little bit later in the webinar. Next slide. When you visit the Cal Nonprofits homepage, you will see on the right there that red arrow is pointing to something, a button that says See Our Grant Guide. When you click on that, you'll get lots and lots of information about this grant and many other things that are available to nonprofits in the COVID environment. One of the things I really want to draw your attention to is we have a document called our FAQs, or frequently asked questions, and that is designed as a guide for nonprofit organizations to apply. You can quickly scan your eligibility. It'll tell you what information and documents you need to gather. And we estimate that if you, with a little prep work, you can get through this application in under an hour. If you're well prepared, it is relatively quick and easy. Next slide, please. This is the information for small businesses and what you see when you go to careliefgrant.com. The red arrow on the top left is pointing to that black bar with lots of headings on it. You would start an application under the Apply Now button, but there's also webinars, multiple webinars every weekday for small businesses who want more information. And I want to talk for a moment about what it means to be an application partner. The role of the application partner in this program is to provide a link to start an application, and also to be available to provide assistance and answer questions for those who are applying. That's how we come to be here today. Cal Nonprofits is an application partner. We don't review applications, we don't make funding decisions, but we do our best to make sure that everyone is supported in getting their application in and considered. Next slide, please. Whether you're a nonprofit or a small business, we do want to make sure that you are on the lookout for fraud. Unfortunately, in this program, not in the program, but there are some scam artists and fraudsters out there who try to imitate Lendistry or application partners. And we want you to know how to avoid that. Number one is that applying for this program is completely free. If anybody asks you to pay for something, it's a scam. Once you submit your application, you'll start receiving communications from Lendistry.com. As I mentioned, this is a program of the state of California, and Lendistry is the company that was hired by the state to administer the program and the website. So that's how you know when your communications are legitimate, because they will come from someone at Lendistry.com. And again, Lendistry's website is careliefgrant.com. Next slide, please. Next, I'm going to talk about the two applications that are available right now. But first, I want to address one of the most frequently asked questions that I receive. I'm often asked, if I already received a grant from this program, am I eligible to apply again? And unfortunately, the answer is you can only get one grant from this program. Regardless of when you applied, if you've already received a CA relief grant, you would not be able to get another one. And I want to talk about round 8 first. Round 8 is for certain types of nonprofit, cultural, and arts organizations. Originally, this application period was scheduled to close earlier in September, but the deadline has been extended to September 30th at 5 p.m. Not all arts and cultural organizations will qualify to apply in round 8. So if you're a nonprofit, please see the FAQs on our website to see if you qualify. And I will also note that round 8 has a unique link to the application. A partner is not required, and you can also see more about that in our FAQs. Next slide, please. Round 9 is also open, and there is $500 million available in round 9 for both nonprofits and small businesses. Christine and I were talking before the webinar began about whether we thought there would be another opportunity to apply, and all of the information that I have been provided says that this is the last round for this funding program. So if you think you might be eligible, I really encourage you to apply. Most people find it relatively quick and easy. And like I said, hundreds of thousands of small businesses and nonprofits throughout California have received funding from this program already. The round 9 application is also available until 5 p.m. on September 30th. And again, if you're a small business, you would go to careliefgrant.com to start your application, and nonprofits should visit us at calnonprofits.org. Most of these slides have the Cal Nonprofits website in green on the bottom left, and also my email address in green on the bottom right. And please feel free to contact me with any questions that you might have or any assistance you need after the webinar and even after you've placed your application. Next slide, please. Some people, as we mentioned, might have applied in an earlier round, and especially if you might have applied way back in January or February of this year, there was an issue with how the applications displayed in the partner portals. Every partner portal is going to display both the nonprofit and the small business application, referred to as a for-profit application. Unfortunately, in the early rounds of the program, it was really hard on the portal to see that there were two applications available and many people chose the wrong one. If you are on the waiting list from back in January or February of this year, it's important that you log in and check your application status to make sure that you filled out the right application form. And we're going to talk about how you see that a little bit later on. If you don't know how to log in and check your application status, whether you are a small business or a nonprofit, you can take a look at those FAQs on the Cal Nonprofit website. There are instructions included in there on how to log in. Again, you can only receive one grant from this program. And if you were on the wait list or your status reads awaiting selection process from an earlier application, you do not need to reapply. Waitlisted applications will automatically roll over for consideration in round 9. Next slide, please. And the big question is, how much can I apply for? This program is different from many other programs in that we're not looking ahead and asking for what we're going to need in the future. We're actually looking back to those organizations who have been able to survive through COVID times. The grant amounts are fixed and they are based on the income that you report on your 2019 taxes. If you're a nonprofit organization, that would be your Form 990. And if you're a small business, of course, it's your tax form. So the grant program requires that you show a minimum of $1,000 in annual revenue in 2019. And for round 8, there is no maximum cap. Arts organizations who qualify of any size can receive a grant. But for everyone else in round 9, the maximum that you can show for your income on your 2019 taxes would be $2.5 million. And you can see if you're $1,000 to $100,000, you can receive a grant of $5,000. If you're $100,000 to $1 million, you can receive a grant of $15,000. And if you're $1 million to $2.5 million, you can receive a grant of $25,000. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other eligibility qualifications, first for nonprofits, and then we'll go on to small businesses. Nonprofits must be a 501c3, C6, or C19. It can be a corporation, an unincorporated association, or a cooperative. You must have a tax return filed for 2019 that shows a California address. Unfortunately, there are no exceptions to that requirement. We just reviewed the annual revenue requirements. You also have to be in operation before June 1st, 2019. You have to have a physical address in California. And you have to have either remained open during COVID, or if sadly you were forced to close, you have to have a plan for reopening. You also have to have at least $1 in qualifying expenses, and we're going to talk about what those are in just a few minutes. Next slide, please. For small businesses, the requirements are similar. You can be a corporation, a sole proprietor, or an independent contract. So if you're an independent contractor and you get paid on a 1099, you count as a small business and are eligible for this program. If you're a sole proprietor, this program does not require employees like the payroll protection program did. Whether you're a small business or a nonprofit, you don't have to have employees in order to qualify. And so we want to think about people who are small businesses and even folks who, like I said, are independent contractors. Maybe some folks might be working as hairdressers or Uber drivers, and all of those kinds of jobs are eligible for a small business grant. Again, you have to have filed your tax return for 2019 showing a California address. And we talked about the revenue requirements. You have to also have been in operation prior to June 1st, 2019, have a physical address in California, remain open or have a reopening plan, and again, at least $1 in eligible expenses. I want to talk for a moment about the requirement for having a physical address in California. You cannot provide a PO box address on the application. Lendistry does not communicate with applicants via US mail, but it does use an actual physical address to help verify and validate the information in your application. If your business or nonprofit typically uses a PO box, you can give a home address for a board member or an employee. It doesn't have to be a business address for the organization. Next slide, please. Let's talk for a moment about who's not eligible. For nonprofits, departments of other organizations, like let's say you were a program of a larger organization or a department in a university. That parent organization is eligible to apply, but unfortunately departments and programs are not. Equally, unfortunately, fiscally sponsored organizations are not eligible because they typically don't have a Form 990 available. Usually your fiscal sponsor includes the fiscally sponsored organizations on their 990. The fiscal sponsor can apply, but only for its own organization and not for the organizations it sponsors. Religious institutions have some different rules, and they are pretty narrow. It can be difficult for a church or a temple or another type of religious institution to qualify, but there are some circumstances under which they do. So please see the FAQs on our website. For small businesses, unfortunately, LLCs and holding companies are not eligible. Next slide, please. I want to talk for a moment about something that is unique to some of the smaller nonprofit organizations. If your nonprofit files the tax return 990 in the shorter forms like the postcard or the 990 EZ, it doesn't show your gross revenue. And so you need some more additional documentation. Lendistry will already know that you are below the $2.5 million income cap because those tax forms are for smaller organizations, but you have to be able to show that you had at least $1,000 in income during the your 2019 tax year. The way that you show that is that you can access your state RRF1 form that is on file with the California Attorney General. There's a quick and easy link to that in the FAQs on the Cal Nonprofits website, or you can provide a year-end financial report if you have one, or a bank statement showing that you received at least $1,000 in income during a period in 2019. And next slide, please. And I'm going to stop for a moment and ask if we have any questions coming into the chat.
So we do have a few questions that came in from Jeannie. The first one was about whether or not the online portal you're able to save your work.
Thank you. You cannot, and we'll cover that in a little more detail later on.
Okay, great. And then she also had a question about filing the 990. Do you need to have filed oh no, I'm sorry, not 990. Do you need to have filed a 1099?
If you are paid on a 1099, you would be showing that on your 2019 taxes. So there's only one place that Lendistry is going to look, whether you're a nonprofit or a small business, and that'll be on your 2019 tax filing. Whatever it shows there as your gross revenue will be the number that they use to qualify you for the program overall and for a particular grant level.
And I'm assuming that with that $1,000, that demonstrating that your organization has had $1,000 coming in as revenue, is that to ensure that these are organizations that are salient, that have been doing business, so to speak?
That is the intent of the program from the state of California. Unfortunately, it's not available for startups or new organizations. This program is for small businesses and nonprofits to help that were already established to help them weather COVID times.
Okay. And then the last question was about the physical address. So we know that PO boxes wouldn't count, but how would the state define what counts as a physical address? Like, would a home address for being used by a nonprofit count?
Yep, anything they can find on a map.
Okay, great. I just want to give another minute for folks if there are any other questions before Sue moves on to the rest of her presentation. And then also to check with Jeannie if that answered her questions. Okay, great. Looks like we answered all of Jeannie's questions. Great. Wonderful. So then if there are no other questions, we'll keep moving on, Sue. And I know we'll have more time at the end for any additional questions that come through.
That's right. So next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about preparing to apply. The first thing that everybody needs to know is that if you are accessing the application from a computer, you must be working in Google Chrome as your browser. The platform was built on Google Chrome, and if you're using other browsers like Firefox or Internet Explorer, the application tends to freeze up or return errors. And you want to use Google Chrome not only when you are applying the first time, but anytime you might go back to interact with your application or check your status. And there are more tech tips on our website and the FAQs. Next slide, please. The next thing you're going to do is to gather your information. Of course, you'll need your 2019 tax return, all of the pages, and every applicant needs a government issued ID for identity verification. Think a driver's license or a passport, any government issued ID that has your photo on it and is current. They will not accept expired ID. You'll need an application certification form. Some people confuse that with the application itself. The application will be filled out entirely online. And for the nonprofit folks, it's often good to know that there's no narrative to this application. You're simply filling in answers to questions. The application certification form is where you sign it and say that everything in your application is true. And for the nonprofits, again, you can link to that through the FAQs on the Cal Nonprofits website. For small businesses, if you scroll down on the CA Relief Grant website, you will see the application certification form there. You download it or print it out and fill it out, save it in an electronic form, and you'll be uploading it to your application with your other documents later on. If you are a nonprofit, you have an EIN number. If you are a company with employees, you'll also have an EIN number. But if you're a sole proprietor or a 1099 contractor, you'll put in your social security number. All applicants are going to be asked to provide their social security number and date of birth. And I want to talk about that for a moment. For nonprofit organizations in particular, that's very uncomfortable. It's not typical in a nonprofit grant application. The way that data is used is for identity verification. Lendistry does not see your personal data. It goes directly to a company called Plaid. And my understanding is Plaid provides secure transaction services for companies like Visa. So I get a lot of questions about, do I actually have to provide my my date of birth and my social security number if I work in a nonprofit organization and I'm filling out the application? And the answer is yes. You'll also need to know what date your organization started for both nonprofits and small businesses. Below that, we'll see there are some things that may not apply to everyone. Nonprofits will need their articles of incorporation. You'll also need your 501c tax exempt certificate. And as we mentioned before, if you need additional documentation in a smaller organization to demonstrate you had at least $1,000 in income in 2019, you'll need that. Some other businesses might have a certificate of organization or a fictitious name registration, which is also known as a DBA or doing business as. And you may, nonprofits or small businesses may have a government issued business license. Not all do, but if you have it, you should provide it. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about some of the numbers that you'll need to calculate. We already talked about your gross revenue will come directly from your 2019 tax return. The application also requires for both small businesses and nonprofits to provide revenue data from 2 6-month periods. The first is April 1st to September 30th, 2019, and then from that same period in 2020. What this is used for is to demonstrate the impact of COVID on your organization or business. You do not have to show a difference or a loss in 2020 over 2019. However, those that do will receive a higher priority for funding. And another note about those figures for 2020, you don't want to include any government COVID relief that you received in your 2020 figure, because you're going to be asked that in a separate question on the application. So if you've got any federal COVID relief like PPP or IDL, or if you've got county or funds from a county or city program, you're going to want to have that available because you'll be asked to provide that on the application. Next slide, please. As I promised, we're going to be talking about qualifying expenses. The good news is you only need $1 in qualifying expenses to be able to apply for this program. And the expenses would have to have been incurred March 1st through December 31st of last year. And they can include things like your regular operating expenses, rent, mortgage, utilities, insurance, payroll, telecommunications, phone costs, internet costs, et cetera, et cetera. They can also be expenses related to operating during COVID. If you needed to spend extra on personal protective equipment or hand sanitizer or plexiglass in order to keep operating, those are qualifying expenses too. If you had to purchase any COVID-related equipment, or anything that allowed you to continue to operate in the COVID environment, that's a qualifying expense. But the caveat on all of this is you can't double dip. That means that if I have an expense that was already funded by another program or grantor, I can't use that expense to also qualify for this program. Let's choose an example. Let's say that I got a PPP loan and I used it to make my payroll in September of 2020. I can't also count that payroll of September 2020 as a qualifying expense for this program, but I could count my October 2020 payroll as a qualifying expense. And I see a quick question coming in the chat. And if you needed to move your program services or your business online and you had to get a Zoom account, that is also a qualifying expense. It falls under that category of something that you needed to be able to operate in the COVID environment. Next question, please. Or next slide. Next, you're going to start your application, and I'm going to show you what that looks like on our next slide. But first, small businesses, go to careliefgrant.com. On that very top bar over on the left, click on Apply Now and follow the instructions. For nonprofit organizations, you can also go to careliefgrant.com and choose any partner that you'd like. If you'd like to choose Cal Nonprofits as your partner, there is the link to start an application. That's also included in our FAQs. And another note about partners. You do not need to be a Cal Nonprofits member nor to join our organization in order to select Cal Nonprofits as your partner. In fact, if you're a nonprofit organization, we're here to help you no matter who you choose as your partner. Our biggest goal is to make sure as many nonprofits get the support they need as possible from this program. Next slide, please. When you click on your application portal, this is what you're going to see. If you're a brand new applicant and you've never applied before, or if you're an applicant who has, for some reason, needs to start a different application than you already provided, you want to start on click here to apply. If you previously applied and you don't want to continue with that application or it was disqualified, don't try to log in on the right side there. Just start a new application like they never heard of you. And remember to provide a different email address than you did in your prior application. What's going to happen after you apply, and the first questions they're going to ask are your name and your email address. And once you enter an email address into the application, the system will generate an email to that address from Lendistry. It'll contain a link to return to your application and a temporary password. The next time that you come back and want to log in, your login credential is your email address, and you'll enter the temporary password, and you'll be given an opportunity to create your own password. If you go to log in and you don't remember your password, it's okay. You can see there's a button on there that says forgot password. Click on that and you'll get an email with a new temporary password. Be sure that you save that email with your temporary password, because it will have that link that you can get back to your application quickly and easily whenever you'd like, whether it's to complete the application or to upload documents or to check your status. Next slide, please. And here's what you will see when you log into the partner portal to start an application. There will be two applications visible. Obviously, this one is for nonprofits. It says grant program for nonprofits. Yes, I got the right one there. That's where that red arrow is pointing. If you're a nonprofit organization, you want to look for that black bar. It's grayed out here on my slide, but below that is a button that'll be purple and it'll say apply now. That's where a nonprofit organization starts your application. Next slide, please. This is where small businesses start. You will look for the blue bar that says grant program for for-profits and click on that apply now button. Next slide, please. A couple of features on the application that we want to highlight. On the left there, on every page of the application, you can click accessibility if you need accessible features in order to be able to move through the application. And the first page of the application on the right will say select a language. The application is available in 2 or 3 dozen different languages. Not all of them appear here on my slide. So if you prefer to move through the application in a different language, that is available to you. Next slide. And here we see the first page of the application where it says owner details and in parentheses, authorized representative if you're a nonprofit organization. And here is where you will fill in some basic information. I want to stop for a moment and say for nonprofit organizations, it matters who you name as the applicant when you're filling this out. Nonprofit organizations file something called a Statement of Information with the Secretary of State's office in California. And that Statement of Information lists 3 principles from your organization. Typically, it's board members and or the CEO or executive director. It also lists who is your agent for service. On the Statement of Information, the applicant that you choose must appear among those 3 principles. They can also be the agent for service, but they can't be they can't only appear on the Statement of Information as the agent for service. Most of these questions are pretty self-explanatory, but for nonprofits, I do want to highlight down below that that red arrow is pointing to a question that says, what is your percent of ownership? For nonprofits, Lendistry knows that nonprofits don't have owners and you can put in 0%. For small businesses, obviously you would put in the percent of ownership. If you have 1 or more partners, you would want the applicant to be the person who has the highest ownership percentage. Next slide, please. On our slide that says business information, a couple of things that I will highlight. So this is where you would enter in your EIN if you have one, and basic information. Again, now your business address and phone number, etc. But that red arrow is pointing to a drop-down menu that asks, does your business or nonprofit work in one of the 4 priority areas? Those 4 priority areas are emergency food, emergency housing, childcare, workforce development. Workforce development means things like job training and job placement. You can also select other. It's okay to select other. There are some set asides for businesses and nonprofits working in the four priority areas, but you don't have to be among them to qualify, and plenty of other types of organizations have qualified. Next slide, please. The next page of the application says, how can we help you? And for this page and some of the others that we've already reviewed, especially for nonprofit organizations, you sometimes have to choose from drop-down menus where the choices really don't seem to apply to you. I want everybody to remember that some of these questions are not going to affect your eligibility for the grant. They are merely data gathering. And if you come to a drop-down menu and you don't really fit neatly into any of the categories, go ahead and choose one that seems closest so that you can continue to move on through the application. You won't be able to submit your application unless you have filled out every single field. I want to stop for a moment and talk about this page of the application because you'll be asked to report on the number of jobs you retained and the number of jobs you created. And let's talk about what those mean. The number of jobs that you retained is simply the number of employees that you had on December 31st, 2020. It's okay to say 0. If you're a nonprofit and doesn't have any staff, you're all volunteers, you can still qualify. The number of jobs that you created are either new jobs that you added in 2020, or if you were forced to lay off any employees and recalled them in 2020, you would add those 2 numbers together. The number of jobs should be expressed in what we call full-time equivalents or FTEs. And what that means is, let's say that I had 2 half-time employees. 1/2 plus 1/2 equals 1. So I would have 1 FTE. Next slide, please. Here we've got a bunch of arrows, and that first one up on the top left is pointing to a question that says, what is your customer base? Is it B2B, B2C, or both? B2B means business to business. If you are a small business and you sell primarily to other businesses, that would be an example of B2B. If you are a nonprofit and your role is to support other nonprofit organizations, that would be another example. For B2C, that means business to consumer. Most nonprofits are providing services directly to their consumers, and many small businesses are doing the same. Let's say that you have a restaurant and you sell food to the general public. That would be an example of B2C. Those 2 arrows on the right are pointing again to drop-down menus that might not fit neatly for everybody. You may not see a choice that looks like you, but just go ahead and select what's closest so you continue to move through the application. Same thing with that top arrow on the left, but that bottom arrow on the left points to something that asks for your NAICS code. The NAICS code stands for the North American Industrial Classification System. And if you don't know what your NAICS code is, we have resources to help you look that up. For nonprofit organizations, if you file the full 990 and several schedules, you might find it in there. Or if you have done government contracting in the past, those applications generally ask for your NAICS code. For small businesses, it may appear on your tax form as well, so you'd want to look there first. If you don't find it, you can follow that line right across the screen to the right, and it says click here to find your NAICS code. That will take you to a website where you can enter a few keywords about what your business or organization does, and it will give you a list to choose from. If you're still not sure you've got the right code, then in the FAQs on our website, there is a service from the US Census Bureau called Dr. Nasis. You can email or call, and I understand they respond pretty rapidly. Tell them a little bit about who you are or what you do, and they'll help you locate your NAICS code. The remainder of the questions on this page ask for some demographic data. For example, ethnicity, disability, veteran status, and if you're a small business owner, you would answer for yourself. If you are a nonprofit organization, you would answer for either the person who is named as the applicant in the organization or for the majority of people on your senior management team. Next slide, please. We are getting now to the last page of the application. That top arrow on the left is pointing to a question that is a restatement of the 4 priorities. And if you say you're one of the 4 priorities, it's going to ask you, does at least 51% of the revenue for your organization pertain to services in the 4 priorities? That middle arrow is pointing to the 2 questions where you will enter the income data for those 6-month periods in 2019 and 2020. And on the bottom, the red arrow is pointing to the 2 pink lines. And the top one will ask you, where did you receive any other COVID relief funding from a government source? And the second will ask you how much. If you had multiple sources, enter the combined amount into how much. And if you had multiple sources, you can choose the largest source when it says, where did you get your funding? If you had multiple sources, as I mentioned earlier, you want to type out a Word document that lists your sources and the amounts and upload that with any of your other documents. Next slide, please. As you get toward the end of the application, there's a couple of things to see here. One is that purple box that says save and continue later. You don't have to finish your application all at once, but you will need to wait to get that email from Lendistry with your temporary password so that you can log back in and finish. You need to finish part 1 by the deadline of September 30th at 5 p.m. And part 1 is the part that we've just been reviewing where you're answering questions and entering your information. When you get to this part of the application, this pop-up box also says, you can see up in the second paragraph where it's underlined. It tells you which form of application you filled out, either a nonprofit arts and culture application, a nonprofit application, or a small business application. If you get to this point and you found that you filled out the wrong application, you need to exit out of the application, go start all over again on a new application form and provide a different email address than you did in the application that you used by mistake. Next slide, please. When you get, and here is the final thing that you'll see, which is the submit button. A couple of words about that. Once you click on submit, you can not make any changes to your application and you will not be able to go back and review it. We recommend that if you'd like to save your work, that you take screenshots of each of the pages of the application as you fill it out. And once you hit submit, congratulations, you've completed part 1 and you've met the application deadline, but there's still more to do. Next slide, please. What comes next? We've talked about, you'll get that password email from Lendistry. Then you can return and log in and begin uploading your documents. You will see when you go to do that, that there's a list of documents and you click on the corresponding category and upload as indicated. If you put a document in a wrong category, don't worry about it. Lendistry will fix that when they're reviewing your application. And if you have a document that doesn't have a category title, just put it in any of the categories. You will also want to note that the maximum document size is 15 megabytes. Most documents are well below that, but some tax returns are above that, and you do need to provide all of the pages. So if your document is too big to upload, you have 2 choices. You can either separate it into 2 documents and label it accordingly. Think taxes part 1 and taxes part 2, something like that. And if you, or you can compress it if you know how to do that and upload the compressed document. After your application, after you've supplied all of your documents, you will also need to upload your banking information. And by that, it will need to be the login credentials for your bank account and your password. Again, we're all taught to protect this information, but Lendistry does require it in order to provide you a grant. Lendistry does not send out paper checks or do wire transfers. And when you receive a grant, that is how it will arrive directly into your bank account. You don't need to provide that information until you know that you're going to get a grant. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you know that in just a moment. Next slide, please. Again, we have a reminder that anytime you want to go back to log into an application you've already started or completed, to use the box on the right side. And if you're starting a brand new application with a different email address, use the click here to apply button on the left side. Next slide. When you log back into anytime you log back into your application, this is what's known as your status message. And you're going to see that it has a number that starts with DIR, that is your application number. That red arrow is pointing to a blue or purple line that says applied for. This is where you can check the code on your application to also ensure that you filled out the right form. CRG is for small businesses, CRG-NPO is for nonprofits, and CRG-AC-NPO is for the arts and cultural application. As I mentioned earlier, some of those folks who applied way back in round 1 and round 2, when it was real easy to make a mistake on the application form, if that's you, you should be sure to log in, double check your code, make sure it's the right form so that you can reapply if needed before September 30th. It'll also show you the amount that you applied for. And underneath that, you'll see that button that says upload documents and bank info. Next slide, please. Here are the possible status messages that you can see when you log in and what they mean. Incomplete means that you have not yet completed part 1. You need to log back in and do that prior to September 30th at 5 p.m. If you ever started an application and didn't complete it, it will remain in the Lendistry system and will generate emails to the address provided in the application with reminders to come back in and finish the application. If for some reason maybe you started the application and found out you were on the wrong form, and then you went back and started a different application with a different email address, you can ignore the emails to the address that you know was on the wrong application, for example. So just a reminder that you will get communications from all of the applications that you filled out. So it's important to know which email address you use so you know which ones to pay attention to. Once your application is completed, part 1, your status will change to awaiting selection process. If you applied in an earlier round, it may say on the wait list. They mean the same thing. Selected is kind of a misleading term in this program. It doesn't mean that you were selected for funding. It means that you are selected for processing. It means that your application has been pulled out of the pool of all of the current and waitlisted applications, and now they are going to review it. When that happens, you'll see your status change to selected pending validations. It means they're verifying your information. If there's any questions, Lendistry will contact you while they're validating your application. But if they don't have any questions, the next thing you might see is an email from DocuSign with a grant agreement. Again, you want to be monitoring not just your inbox, but your junk and spam folders so that you don't miss emails from Lendistry or from DocuSign. The grant agreement will be live for 3 days and you only need to sign it and then you move to funding. If for some reason you don't see it within the 3 days, you can always call Lendistry and they'll send you another one. Once your DocuSign has been sent, your status changes to in closing, docs out, pending for funding. And then once you've returned your grant agreement and gotten your funds, it'll change to grant funded. So I've been talking for a long time now. We're going to move to questions. And could we advance the slide 2, please? And we'll put up some resources while we're taking questions. Thank
This
you.
one?
That's perfect.
Okay, so Sue, since you just did talk about the DocuSign, and it sounds like there was a 3-day window to make sure to verify and sign it. So we did have a question from one of our participants who said that they got notified that they got the grant, but it was at a time when their executive director was on vacation. So by the time they came back, the window had closed. And so they were trying to contact, I'm assuming it might be Lendistry, right? Because at that point, it's all Lendistry that handles
Exactly.
the processing. So they've emailed, left a voicemail requesting that it be resent, but they haven't heard anything back. So what can be done in that situation?
Can we advance to the next slide? And here's the, on the right side there toward the bottom, that 888 number is the number for Lendistry. I don't recommend in general contacting Lendistry by email. They're not highly responsive, but they do answer the phone. And so you may get communications from your application processor by email. Those you should answer. But if you have a general question, the best way to reach them is to dial that phone number. They are there 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday. And if you call in and ask them to please resend your grant agreement, they should do that very easily. If they don't, call me.
Okay, because it's been, I guess, a few weeks since that happened. So would that
that's
mean
okay.
that, okay, that's still all right? Because I know
That's
I'm
okay.
sure they're anxious, and there might be some organizations that might be anxious to be like, well, did I lose this chance? Is that money going away, or is it still earmarked for our organization?
Lendistry really wants to give you a grant. They really want to. They have to
Good to
verify
know.
that you meet all the qualifications established by the state of California, but they will be flexible with you as much as they can. And honestly, I've talked to people who didn't find their grant agreement for several months and they still got their money. So that's okay.
Oh, that's good
And
to
you know,
know.
this might be a good time to talk about how long it takes to get your money. Once you return that grant agreement, it can still take a couple of weeks. Lendistry sends out funds on Tuesday and Thursdays. They can't tell you exactly when you'll get your money. Every banking institution is different on how long it takes to process. But it won't be, within 24 or 48 hours. It could be within 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay. And just from my own personal experience, having helped some of my relatives, at least with a small business application, it did seem it was like a couple of weeks turnaround.
It can be.
Okay.
What's going to happen now, if you're either a round 8 or round 9 applicant, or if you're on the wait list, Lendistry is going to start processing the next batch of applications on October 1st. So they're going to wait and receive all those round 8 and 9 applications and then begin processing. And we don't yet have a date from Lendistry as to when the last application will be processed. I anticipate it could be as late as the end of November or the beginning of December.
So even if we don't hear back in October, don't fret, they might still be just processing everything.
It could very well be. And you can log into your application and check your status anytime you'd like, because it'll tell you if you've been selected to move forward yet or not.
So at this point, because there's been multiple rounds, no one's really gotten an email saying that you've been rejected for the grant. It's just been a holding pattern, right? If they didn't get it in that particular round, it was waitlisted to the next round, as long as all the paperwork and the documentation order.
For people who are eligible, that's true. Some applications have been processed and people sadly didn't meet the basic eligibility criteria. In that case, you get an email from Lendistry that has 9 possible reasons that you may have been rejected. And unfortunately, it's not very good at telling you which reason applies to you. If you see your status as not selected, you want to give a call to that 888 number at Lendistry and ask them why your application was not selected. If you think they made an error or you don't understand what they're telling you, call me and I'll help you work through it. Okay,
great. So then I guess to go back to that initial question of the signatory document, it sounds like they did leave a voicemail, although I'm not sure where it was left to, but let's say they still have difficulty in getting a hold of someone at Lendistry, then they're free to give you a call.
Yes, but I will likely refer you back to the call center, and here's why. Early on in this grant program, it was a horrible time trying to get through on the 888 number. I'll say that quite frankly. But Lendistry has added a lot of staff and they answer the phone much more quickly and reliably now. And I wish that I had access to the Lendistry system, but I don't. I can't see your application, or I would just look things up for people, but I can't do that. What I can do is help you troubleshoot and work through what comes up for you and give you advice on what to do. For nonprofit organizations, especially, sometimes I know a little more than the call center staff and can be a little more helpful.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, Sue. And then maybe this might be a good point to explain, I guess, the different role that Lendistry and Cal Nonprofits play, because it sounds like Lendistry was the vendor that was selected to handle all the applications for the state, but there are these other partners, like we know some small business associations or chambers of commerce have been selected. So Cal Nonprofits is one partner. So can you explain a little bit about Cal Nonprofits' role versus what Lendistry does?
Sure. So Lendistry actually built the computer system and the web platform. Lendistry receives and processes your applications and makes funding decisions. Cal Nonprofits, as an application partner, our role is to provide you with assistance, answer your questions, do things like we're doing today in the webinar. And then also, if you have questions for Lendistry and you're not really sure you understand the way they answered, or you think there's an error, I can help you with that, particularly for nonprofit organizations. For small business owners, you do want to choose a partner that can provide the same services for you, only for small businesses.
Okay, thanks for differentiating that. And then
Sure.
what would be the benefit, I guess, for nonprofits to go with Cal Nonprofits as our partner in their application process?
Well, beyond that, we are the only specialist for nonprofit organizations in this process. When nonprofits apply through the Cal Nonprofits portal, you're showing the state both the power of nonprofit organizations and how we need to continue to provide support for nonprofit organizations. You might remember way back at the beginning of this presentation, I talked about Cal Nonprofits' role as an advocate for nonprofits, that it allowed nonprofits to be eligible for these funds, because originally they were only thought of for small businesses. So when you choose Cal Nonprofits as your partner, you're joining together with over 10,000 other nonprofit organizations in the state to show how strong nonprofit organizations are.
Thank you, Sue. We wholeheartedly agree, not just because we're a member of Cal Nonprofits, but as a community fund that is supporting the nonprofit sector serving our Asian and Pacific Islander communities, we want to ensure that there is that collective power and that the state is able to reckon with the fact that there's so many nonprofits that can take advantage of these resources that are made available. I wanted to see if Angie Kano wanted to ask her question live. She had a question about how to adjust expenses in regards to how they recorded COVID relief help, as well as getting the PPP loan. Angie, do you feel comfortable asking? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just confused because at the beginning you mentioned that we had to adjust our expenses and take out any PP loan kind of relief. And then later on, we had to also input how much help we got during COVID-19. So I just wanted to know, why was it necessary to make those adjustments when we also had to make separate reports for the reliefs we received later on?
So you don't have to report expenses. And thank you for your question, because it allows me an opportunity to clarify. As we talked about, Lendistry is going to look at your 2019 tax return to determine your gross revenue for 2019, and that qualifies you for both the program overall and a particular grant amount. Then they're going to ask for your revenue for those 2 6-month period, not your expenses. And I can't tell you why they want you to back out the government assistance for COVID and put that in a separate line. I don't know, but that is the way that they do request to fill out the application. I also want to highlight that for a nonprofit, when you receive your grant, you don't have to go back and apply it to the specific expenses. You only have to keep a record that you had qualifying expenses. And I get to ask the question a lot, are we going to have to report on this grant? Are we going to have to be monitored? I'm reasonably certain there will not be monitoring, and we have received no information about reporting. I would anticipate that if there was any reporting at all, that it would be very short and simple. So I hope I've answered your questions, but please, please continue if I haven't. Okay.
Thanks again for your question, Angie. And I know quite a few people asked this question going back to that part of the application that was asking to record what kind of emergency funding that you receive from the government. And I'm wondering, Katie, would you be comfortable in asking that question live? And if you don't, I can ask it for you, because I know quite a few folks were wondering about this. So Katie's question was, do we only have to list any emergency funding from the government? What about foundation grants that they may have received? And I think to piggyback off of that, I know Esther Yim also had a question about they received government funding that wasn't technically an emergency relief grant. So would that have to be included as well?
So to answer the first question, you don't back out your foundation funding. They are only interested when they ask about how much government-sponsored COVID relief funding have you received. And forgive me, Christine, can you feed me the second part of that question again?
Sure. So the second part of the question was, do they need to record any type of government funding, even if it's not COVID related?
Thank you very much. The answer to that is no. Industry is only interested in what other government COVID programs that you got. So let's say that you're a contractor, maybe you provide services for students or something like that. That's not directly COVID related. It's not from either the federal, county, or city government. Then you don't need to back those numbers out, only the COVID relief from those government sources.
Okay, so like an obvious example would be PPP. Some cities have done COVID-19 relief or emergency funding, like those would be examples, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then let's see what other questions have popped up. So Esther, do you want to ask your question? I know it's a little specific, but I do feel like there might be some organizations that might be in that position. When you want to ask it live?
Hi, thank you. My question was concerning the $1,000 income threshold that you have to qualify. That can't be then money that you already had in your savings account that you had perhaps, fundraised and saved from a previous year. It has to be new income that came in specifically in 2019.
In your tax year 2019, that is correct. It doesn't apply to reserves or savings. It has to be income for that year in 2019.
Thank you.
Sure.
And then I think I see a hand raised from Cynthia. Would you like to ask your question live?
Yes, thank you, Christina. Finally, I'll be able to get in. I have a question because our organization, we don't have a staff, but we have rent that we have to pay. In 2019, our income somehow less than 2020. The reason 2020, our income's more because we have the GoFundMe that we raised to help small business during the civil unrest on May 31st. That's a big chunk, come to that. And another funding that we got it from the Angelina Jolie Foundation to help the small business during the civil unrest. So our income is like over $100,000, but the money is just coming in and go out. So you think that because we reluctant to apply the grant because our income is going to be shows that more compared to 2019. So can you please give us advice?
I can, and I understand completely. So the kind of money that you were talking about is pass-through money, right? Like we got it and we have to show it on our income and on our tax statement, but we don't get to keep it. We're passing it on to other people. We don't get to spend it otherwise. And this might be true for certain organizations if you also had, say, a capital campaign or just received an unusually large gift in one of those years, et cetera. Unfortunately, you can't back those things out. So if you received it in 2020 and that makes your income look greater in 2020 than it was in 2019, you can still apply. That doesn't disqualify you. But people who are showing a drop in revenue in 2020 over 2019 will have a greater priority for funding. And let me say that I understand the situation completely. I did advocate with Lendistry to allow those things to be backed out, but they couldn't allow that.
So thanks for your question, Cynthia. And I guess related to that, Sue, can you speak to how the state / Lendistry, when they're reviewing the documents and determining the final selection as to who gets these grants and who is the priority, how are they assessing that? Like, is it based on the income levels of like that particular area that the nonprofit or small business is operating out of? Is it the budget size? Is it looking at how revenues have dipped from year to year?
So I can tell you what I know, and I can tell you also that I don't know everything about that. What happens is that your application is received or it's sitting on the wait list, and Lendistry has an algorithm that it uses to select applications for processing. They have not told us all about that algorithm, or I would share that with you. What I can say is that there are some set-asides for the organizations working in the 4 priority areas. There's a small set-aside for organizations in rural areas and a couple of other things. But even if you don't fall into any of those categories, I do encourage people to apply. I think I mentioned earlier that over 7,500 nonprofits in California have already received funding totaling almost $100 million. And we think that if you apply, there's a good chance that you can get a grant.
Mm-hmm. And I think here at APCF, we know kind of the power of, the volume of applications versus how many will actually be finally selected. And I know that on an individual level for the organization that may not get funded, it can be very disappointing. But I think in the long run, it's very helpful from an advocacy standpoint to leverage that to show that there is this huge need. That look
Exactly.
at how many nonprofits have applied, and and that only a fraction of them were funded, and to know that there may be even other organizations out there that have not been reached out to because of various reasons, like the shortness of the time windows, or just maybe the language capacity of the state and Lendistry in getting the information out, which is why we're doing webinars like this and partnering with Cal nonprofits to ensure that this information is really getting down to the most underserved parts of our community.
Yes, and I hope that those who are in attendance today will share the information with people that they know. Part of the journey working on this program for me has been remembering how much nonprofits bring so much to our lives. If you think about small volunteer nonprofits, maybe those that provide services that children use, like sports leagues or scouting programs or art or music programs. We think about the nonprofit organizations that assist us as elders, senior centers, or even hospices. And if we think about, if you were diagnosed with a rare disease, you would turn to that nonprofit to help provide you with resources and information. And so nonprofits are around in every aspect of our lives. And we really want to see everybody get the support that they deserve for the amazing work that they do.
Absolutely. We do have a question from Feng about whether membership dues would count as income.
Yes. So that should be counted as your income on your 2019 990. And when you're looking at those 2 6-month periods, you want to include all sources of income.
Okay, and we do have a few more minutes. If folks have any additional questions, please feel free to put it in the chat as you have been, or you can raise your hand as well. Looks like Cynthia might have another question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Christine. The income that we have to report is just from April to September. Am I correct? So they, that on the application, some of for the private, I never done the nonprofit yet, but always as April 1st to September 30th. So just only during that time, right? That income that you have to report.
Again, they'll be looking at your gross revenue from your 2019 990, and then what you will fill into the application, you are correct, is the gross revenue from those 2 6-month time periods, one in 2019 and one in 2020. I also want to make sure that I'm mentioning that when you do get your grant funds, you can treat them as unrestricted. You do not have to go back, open your books, fund certain expenses, et cetera, et cetera. The only record you need to retain is that you had qualifying expenses during that period of March 1st to December 31st, 2020.
So, as nonprofits, when it comes to grants, the question we always ask is, what reporting mechanism will there be? And I know you alluded to that a while ago, that we're still kind of waiting on that information to come down the pike. But do you have a sense of whether we'll know this year, especially for the organizations that may have gotten funded in the earlier rounds, or they know of small businesses that have? What can we tell them when that information might be expected?
I wish I could tell you that. I can only tell you that no information about that has been shared with the application partners yet.
Okay. And then there was a more of a logistical question coming from Jeannie about the portal itself. So her question is, so part 1 does not allow you to save and come back, but when you receive the email with a temporary password, that's when you're able to go in and to make any changes or to upload documents and to save as you go along. Is that correct?
That's correct. If you don't finish your part 1 all in one sitting, you will get that email, and it usually arrives within about an hour. So it doesn't take a long time to get that. So if you were starting your application in the morning and you want to finish in the afternoon, you can generally do that. You just, again, hit save and continue, exit out of the application. Wait until you get the email with the link and your temporary password so you can log back in where it says existing customers line in, and save that email where you can find it, because you'll click on that link every time you want to return to your application, whether it's to finish it, upload documents, or view your status.
Okay, great. Just want to make sure that I didn't skip anyone's question. Carrie, did we get all the questions in the chat?
Yes, I think we are all set.
Okay, great. So I do want to encourage folks, as Sue shared, let's really take advantage of this opportunity, whether it's for your own nonprofit or small business clients that you serve, because it is the last round as far as we know. So this could be our very last chance. And I know when this information first came out less than a year ago, earlier this year, as Sue mentioned, it was very crazy. It was very chaotic. I still remember I was sharing anecdotally with her, just from a personal level, I was trying to help my own parents as small business owners who don't speak English very well and who may not have all the right documentation. I was helping them to navigate the system along with some of my other relatives who are small business owners as well. And at the time, I think this was back in February, it was a very the system was in upheaval. It was very difficult to upload documents. And I think that the state and Lendistry just may have, I'm sure they anticipated the demand, but it ended up being very overwhelming. So I know that might have been very discouraging for some of us who were looking into this 6 months ago. But Sue did reassure me when we were planning for this webinar that a lot of things have changed, and that Lendistry and the state and all the partners have really worked hard to ensure that all those hiccups that happened the first couple of rounds have been resolved, and that it's a much more user-friendly kind of system. As long as I think organizations and small businesses can be prepared to know what to expect, that this is the type of information that will be asked, these are the documents that you want to prepare in round 1, that as long as you have that information on hand, that can empower you to fill out the application successfully. So I really want to thank Sue for coming in and spending some time to share with our nonprofits very directly. We know that this information is out there in various different forms. There's an FAQ that she had mentioned, and there's all kinds of links that we had shared. But I think it's still very meaningful and impactful when we're able to hear directly from someone who is an expert, with this application. She's been with it for many months and has answered and provided technical assistance to so many nonprofits that are very specific to nonprofits. Because again, this program was initially created for small businesses, and nonprofits were kind of the afterthought. So it's really helpful to have someone like Sue with her level of expertise and working knowledge of nonprofits. So please join me in really thanking Sue for sharing with us today. Virtual round of applause.
Oh, thank you, Christine. It was my pleasure. And if I can answer any more questions, my email address is right down there on the right-hand side of that slide, and I'm happy to do that.
So, as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, we will be sharing Sue's contact information. We'll have a follow-up email where we'll include a copy of this recording along with the slides. We do ask that you fill out the evaluation to get access to the slides, but all the links that Sue had shared and that I also included in the chat, that when it comes to how to apply, the FAQ itself, and any other resources, I will be sending them out in the follow-up email as well. So, thank you for sticking through to it to the very end and for all of your questions, because even though some of your questions may have been quite specific to your organization, I think that what we've learned in this process with this relief grant is that there are patterns that we see emerging, and your specific situation might actually be applicable to a lot of other nonprofits out there, including the ones that are on this Zoom. So I also do want to let folks know that we have another webinar coming up in a few weeks on Wednesday, October 13th at 2 p.m. This is on impact evaluation, which is a different form of program evaluation. And it's really to think about how do we measure impact and effectively communicate that, whether we're speaking with the community, with stakeholders, with funders, with government, doing advocacy work, or even thinking about how to relate that work internally amongst the staff to empower the staff itself to be able to really communicate to external partners, what kind of impact are you making? So how can that be measured? How can that be communicated effectively? So we're very fortunate to have Dr. Sylvia Poo, who is a nonprofit consultant who has a background in finance as well as nonprofits and sociology, to really explain to us, this new mode of doing program evaluation and how this will be an effective use of time for nonprofits to invest in this type of evaluation. So please save the date. We'll have the link to register hopefully in the follow-up email. So it's on Wednesday, October 13th at 2 p.m. If you're able to join us, it'll be the same setup as this webinar. So thank you so much on behalf of the Asian Pacific Community Fund in partnership with Cal Nonprofits. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon, and big thanks once more to Sue Sigler.
Thank you.